Hi, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas on Friday, December the 27th. And welcome to our commentary 2 days after Christmas, roughly a week before 2025. Sometime next week, we're going to do a show wrapping up 2024. Obviously, the big story of 2024 has to be the election of Donald Trump. But there's a lot of other stories too in 2024 that we'll get into, and then we'll preview 2025 and see what we think. I'll make you a couple of predictions as well as we look ahead to 2025. Let me begin by directing you to a post that I have over at the American Thinker, and it has to do with the Panama Canal. Look, I think President Trump has created a lot of conversation talking about the canal, but here's the bottom line. He's not really talking about Panama. That's not really the issue. It's not Panama, it's China. That's what he's talking about, and that's what he's focusing on. And I think he's concerned, as I point out in my article, like a lot of us are, that China is growing in influence in our part of the world, what is known as the Americas. And he feels that, we have to retake that area. We have to basically, once again, become the dominant force on this side of the world. And when you've got China building an important port in Peru, a port that will not only have commercial, but also potentially military applications, when you have two Chinese companies running a good portion of the canal, I mean, you've got lots of issues to worry about. And so he's bringing that up. That's what he's doing. And I think it's about time that we bring into focus the influence of China in the Western Hemisphere and why we shouldn't accept it as a given, why we should do something about it. So I'm glad that he's bringing this up. I know a lot of people always get all worked up because of the way President Trump will say some things. Look, that's just the way he is. That's the way he talks. That's his style. But get into the substance. Go into what he's saying. And I think you'll see that he's making a lot of sense when he's talking about the canal and he's talking about China as well. So check out my post over at the American Thinker. Before I get into my other topic of the week, I just want to tell you that I've heard a lot of commentary and news coverage in the news about a fight for the speakership of the U.S. House. Some people want to replace Speaker Johnson. He doesn't have a lot of numbers to play with. So it wouldn't be impossible to replace him if there was really a campaign. But I think the question that these Republicans have to ask themselves is this the best way to help President Trump get off to a good start? I mean, look, the time's going to fly. The new Congress will be here in a couple of weeks. President Trump is going to be here in less than 4 weeks. So you don't want to get all caught up in another one of these speaker battles. The last one, if you remember, went on for several weeks, and you don't want to do that. I personally hope that Speaker Johnson prevails, and I hope that he works very closely with President Trump, and they try to get some things done to the Senate as soon as possible, get them out of the House and do the Senate as soon as possible, because obviously the bigger debate is going to come in the Senate where you need 60 votes. But let's get a lot of things done out of the House. Let's put the speaker battles to the side. Now, Speaker Johnson with now President Trump is going to have a great opportunity to take some positions or maybe do some things that he couldn't before because he had a Democrat president and a Democrat Senate. So he has a few more things working for him now. I hope he takes advantage of them. But it would be, in my opinion, a huge mistake at this stage of the game. It would be a huge mistake to get into a battle over the speakership. I'm not exactly sure who is going to be any better at running the House, but I would stick with Johnson for the time being, and let's see what happens in a year or so. Let's see where things are. But for the time being, I think in the interest of the Trump agenda, let's stick with Speaker Johnson, and let's get a good effort out there to pass some legislation. They got to get the budget done. If they want to do some things that are very effective and very quick, like with sanctuary cities, and some other things. They got to get the budget done. Now, you can do that through reconciliation, meaning you only need 51 votes in the Senate. They've got 53. So they should be able to do that, but you got to get it to the House first. It starts in the House. So that's why I'm not a big fan of leadership changes at this stage of the game. I just don't think it's going to help the Trump agenda. If anything, it's probably going to hurt the agenda. And I don't think President Trump needs that, frankly, as he's getting his second term, or his second, whatever you want to call it, second chance, if you will, of a term started here very soon. So stick with Speaker Johnson. That would be my advice to the Republicans. And let's see how it works out. I'm optimistic that it's actually going to work out pretty well with Speaker Johnson now that he's working with President Trump, as well as a majority leader in the Senate. I think those three guys can get some things done, and we need to get some things done very quickly in 2025. I've got a post coming out Saturday morning. You may have heard this story. It's a shocking story. I had to read it several times to believe it. But it turns out that the country of Cuba, where I was born and came here many, many years ago, the island of Cuba, as all of you know, a communist country, the island of Cuba all of a sudden has a sugar problem. You know, Cuba, of course, for decades was a major exporter of sugar. It had a very developed sugar industry when the communists came to power. The sugar mills, or centrales, as they were called in Spanish back then, were very effective. They were very efficient, and every single year you had a huge sugar crop that was consumed, of course, in Cuba and exported as well. Much of it was purchased by the United States. The United States and Cuba cut a deal. I think it was in the 1930s, where they had a set price, if you will, for the sugar, and that way you didn't have these fluctuations that had hurt Cuba in the past. But anyway, the communists came in, they expropriated the sugar mills. They were wonderful private companies. Most of them were Cuban companies, by the way, or Cuban capital, that is. So anyway, so they came in, they broke that up. And now here we are, as we finish another year of the Castro dictatorship. Here we are in a situation where Cuba has a shortage of sugar. In fact, they have to import sugar, which is, you know, incredible to think about that. Cuba has to import sugar, and because they have to import Cuba or sugar, bring it from, you know, more expensive world markets, the price of sugar within Cuba has also gone up significantly. So what a disaster, you know, what an amazing tribute, if you will, to socialism. I mean, you want to find out how socialism works, just go to Cuba and see for yourself how a thriving middle-class economy was destroyed by communism and socialism. What a story. And I'll have that post available on Saturday morning. But when I think of sugar in Cuba, and I relate this in the article, it reminds me of when I was a boy in Cuba. I used to go to the street corner with my father, and he would buy a cigar. He would buy a cigar. And then he would also buy these little these little coffee cups, Cuban coffee, we used to call it. And, you know, he would get the little cup, and then the lady who was serving the coffee would always ask sugar. And he would say, yeah, un poquito, a little bit. So she would put like a little tiny bit of sugar in the little coffee cup that Cubans like my father used to consume. And I have that memory of him buying the cigar and drinking that little cup of coffee with a little bit of sugar. And that's kind of the memory that I have of those years, you know, walking with my father to the corner of our street where they had this little shop. Or I remember they had this, like in the corner, there was a lady there who would make the coffee, and then they had these cabinets full of cigars that you could choose one from. And, you know, when I think of the shortage of Cuba, it just makes a shortage of sugar in Cuba. It just makes me mad. It reminds me once again of the incredible failure of socialism as an economic program, as an economy. I mean, it simply doesn't work. And I don't know how many more times it has to fail for people to realize that it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. Socialism just doesn't bring you prosperity. It doesn't fix anything. And as we're now seeing in Cuba, my goodness, it even creates a shortage of sugar in an island known for a couple of centuries as one of the world's most successful exporters of sugar. Now, the Cuban government, of course, is going to blame the embargo, and they're going to blame external factors. Look, the embargo has nothing to do with it. The embargo has nothing to do with it. The machinery that they're going to say they have a shortage of machines or spare parts, they could get those parts in the open market. They don't have to buy them from the United States. I mean, those are machines that they can purchase around the world, or equipment or spare parts they could buy in different used markets or markets around the world. The problem is they just, they don't care. They don't care. It's just very poorly planned. These things are very poorly planned, very poorly done. And again, you're seeing the failure of a socialist economy in Cuba. So check out my post Saturday morning about the shortage of sugar in Cuba. It's hard to believe for me to even say it, but it is absolutely true. Anyway, just a little bit of on this day in history. 1979, the Soviet Union went into Afghanistan. They actually went in on Christmas Day, and a couple of days later, they had taken over Afghanistan. They never really took it over. I mean, they ran the city, Kabul, but they had a lot of problems keeping the countryside started or going. And they had all kinds of guerrilla problems and all kinds of problems fighting the insurgents inside Afghanistan. It turned out to be a very bloody investment for the Russians, who eventually packed up and left whenever it was. But it was a horrible decision to go in, and it was a devastating blow to the Russian army. And in fact, many people will tell you, many experts on the collapse of the Soviet Union will tell you that it was really the invasion of Afghanistan and just the ill-fated invasion and use of the military in Afghanistan that really began the collapse of the Soviet Union. It was going to collapse anyway, but Afghanistan, of course, made it just collapse a little bit faster. So 1979, the old Soviet Union went into Afghanistan. What a mess that turned out to be for the Soviets. Thank you for listening. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye, everybody.